Hello to all you vacation rental pioneers out there. My name's Matt Landau, and this is Unlocked, the podcast series that introduces you to the world's leading vacation rental innovators by diving deep into one single key, one specific best practice or technique that opened the door and changed the game. So we're going to change things up a bit in this episode. The Unlocked podcast is all about short and actionable tips you can implement immediately. But in the process of building the podcast, I also realized there were some individuals whose stories just needed to be told. There were some professionals who, beyond their tactics, have changed this industry in one way or another. They each have remarkable stories about how they got here and what's made them so successful along the way. These are people who I really just want to learn more about myself, really, so maybe that's the excuse. I'll be publishing a few of these longer-form icon interviews over the course of the next few months, in between the regular style of Unlocked sessions. Those are not going anywhere. I think these fly-on-the-wall conversations will make listening fresh and light. It'll make things definitely more fun. I only met Steve Milo a few years ago, but he's been leading the property management charge for eons with his company VTrips. Steve can be spotted on the speaking circuit at conferences around the world, shooting straight and saying some of the things other people may not like, but things they need to hear. I had the chance to sit down with Steve in Spain this month after we bumped into each other at the airport, and what I learned in this conversation ranged from comic books to profit to traveling with his wife Kyung. Without any further ado, here's me and Steve. My name's Matt Landau, and this is Unlocked. That's how I introduce each of the podcasts.
All right. Well, great, Matt. Pleasure to be here. Good. Thank you.
Where are we?
We're in Barcelona at the Kigo Conference.
And where are we specifically for those who are not in this room with us?
Well, we're in the World Trade Center of Barcelona, overlooking the port and a couple of very large yachts.
And we've got a beautiful backdrop here for what appears to be glamour shots or something. We can do that after the interview. How's the conference been?
Conference is great. I mean, I always find it interesting to come to a European conference. I think the European property managers have a completely different perspective than North American property managers. And it's interesting to hear their perspectives and get the diversity of how they do business and the things that are important to them. It just helps me with the context of better understanding how we do business.
Biggest difference?
Well, I think the biggest difference for them is, in the most case, their inventory is not exclusive. And right from there, that changes how they handle it. It also, in some ways, indicates to me some of the challenges that are really in Europe, where when you don't have exclusivity of the inventory, you can't make the investment into your operation. You can't make your investment even into the property that you would, because you don't know whether you'll actually be able to rent the weeks or they'll be taken out from underneath you or move to another agency. It's a very, very difficult business arrangement they have here in Europe. And I think it indicates to some extent why they're a little behind the North American market.
Fair enough. And yet, vacation rentals or holiday rentals seem to have existed here since the beginning of time almost. It is part of the European DNA.
Well, I mean, I think Europe is unique, right? So they're actually the center. They're literally in the center. They're between Asia and North America. You have hundreds, if not thousands of years of histories in certain countries. You have amazing sites, amazing culture. I mean, the difference between France and Spain is massive, and it's just one border away. It's a lot different than going from North America to Canada. I mean, from the United States to Canada. So, in the United States, we really don't see that kind of difference when you travel. I mean, particularly within the States, there's some differences, but nothing like the difference between traveling in Europe.
Do you travel?
Yes.
A
lot.
Who do you travel with?
My wife.
And tell us a little bit about your wife.
Well, her name is Kyung, and she's was originally born in South Korea. And we got married in the United States in Florida, and she's a business partner. And we've built VTrips together.
Where did you guys meet?
We met in Ponte Vedra, Jacksonville, Florida. So we met. I actually met her trying to find a real estate agent to help with my broker license.
Okay. How long ago was this?
10 years ago.
Okay. And at the very beginning, purely business.
Purely business.
And you eventually asked her out on a date or something?
Yes, yes. And then one thing led to another, and we ended up getting married. So
And now you're travel buddies.
now we're traveling together.
Some of the best travel that you've done recently?
Well, I have to say, to me, I like history, and I still think travel to Israel is at the top of any list.
I've never been.
It's amazing, right? So it would be the number one destination in the world if there weren't so many other risk and security reasons why people wouldn't go to Israel. I mean, Jerusalem is the most historic city in the world of multiple cultures and multiple historical sites. So Jerusalem is just really one of the wonders of the world. And last time we were there, we just spent a week in Jerusalem, and then we used it as a base to go other places. But I mean, you've got the Wailing Wall, you've got the Temple on the Mount, you've got the huge mosque, and then you have probably one of the most famous Christian churches, essentially where Christ died and then was eventually resurrected. So, I mean, just right there is the amazing sights. And then, outside of Jerusalem is the Dead Sea, Masada. We saw Jericho, Bethlehem, and then there's, amazing Roman ruins throughout Israel. So, I mean,
So you're saying I should go?
Yes. I mean, it should be on your bucket list.
And when you travel together, do you stay in vacation rentals or do you stay in hotels?
We have stayed in a mix. So we stay in Jerusalem. We stayed in an Airbnb, and it was a relatively good experience. And then we've also stayed in hotels. So it somewhat depends on where we're going, how many people are in the group.
We always like to say that sort of one of the big jokes of the industry, the big ironies, is that when we're not working, we stay in hotels.
Yes. Well, I've started to stay in more hotels because when we travel as a couple, hotels make more sense. And I think Airbnb or a vacation rental makes sense when you have a bigger group. I think when you're just two people, a hotel many times is far more effective. Plus, if you're traveling around. The last trip which was business related, we were in Prague, and we went from Dresden to Prague to Berlin to London, and it was just so much easier to go with hotels because we're just two people. So to me, I look at us as being in the accommodation business. We may say we're alternative accommodations, but at the end of the day, we're all in accommodations. And at the end of the day, what you're looking for is to create the ultimate accommodation that works for your guest when it works for them. And I do think we're going to see more and more blurring of all accommodations between traditional hotel companies and traditional vacation rental companies, giving consumers what they ultimately want, which is a diversity of choice.
We had breakfast the other day. We were talking about how hotels are starting to look a little bit more like vacation rentals, and vacation rentals are starting to look a little bit more like hotels. What is the difference between this word accommodations that you use and a broader a concept of hospitality, this bigger idea? What's the big difference? Is there a difference?
Well, I think, again, the line is blurring. Where we started, and many of us started, which is you're very hands-on with the guests, and it's about the experience. And I think Airbnb has done a masterful job of creating this company culture of the guest experience. And, the guest experience is extremely powerful, right? So vacations create memories. It's the time where people are together. They're seeing amazing sights. Probably some of when you get together with friends or family, some of the things that are most common you talk about is places you visit, experiences you had. And so, this whole concept of experiences become very powerful. On the other hand, I think at the end of the day, people want an accommodation, right? So if they're going to a place like Paris or they're going to Barcelona, the experiences that they're going to are really most likely the ones that are in the top guidebooks. They're going to go see the Eiffel Tower. They're going to go see the Louvre. They're going to go see Notre Dame. So what they want is an accommodation that is clean, comfortable,
Safe.
The Wi-Fi works, right? They can get in, it's safe. And what they don't want is a bad experience, right? So we can talk about good experiences, which is what a lot of the OTAs want to talk about. But what you don't want are the bad experiences where you can't get into your property, where the Wi-Fi doesn't work, where the bathroom configuration is just not what you would expect.
A camera hiding inside of a fire alarm.
Yeah, you don't want those bad experiences. And I think as we start to blur between the line of what truly the vast majority of travelers want, they want accommodations with standards. And they want to know that what they're getting is accurate based on the web description, and that it's easy to access. And if they have problems, that they can be easily remedied. And I think that's the vast majority of the traveler.
And that really describes most goods and services that we consume in general. We want what was advertised. And if we have an issue, we want the ability to take it up with somebody who we know at least is going to treat the issue honestly. Let's backtrack a little bit. Who are you? Like, what did you used to do before you entered vacation rentals? I have absolutely no idea.
Folks, since this is the first Icon interview, quick heads up. This interview is about to go from normal podcast to, whoa, this guy is really interesting. I believe every vacation rental professional has a secret superhero life they bring with them to this industry. And as Steve shares his, try to think about how you share yours.
Well, I guess I'm a serial entrepreneur. So I literally started my own company when I was 19 years old out of my college dorm room, selling comic books through the mail.
You're kidding me.
No.
So, okay, elaborate, because I actually was a big comic book collector too.
So I, back in that time before the internet was going, I created listings on collectible sites and started to sell comic books through the mail. So these would be comic books that were collectible issues. So at that point, the X-Men, for example, were very, very popular. So people at that point were trying to get older issues of X-Men, and I was buying them.
What, from like hobby shops? You were going sorting through and finding the good ones.
Right. So there was some tricks of the trade, which is there were distributors that were sitting on excess inventory. Even Marvel had excess inventory. And if you were in the know, you could buy their excess inventory at wholesale prices, and then you would resell it at collectible prices.
But excess inventory is different from these prized first issues.
Well, you're talking about items in the 60s. I made my niche selling items that were in the 70s and 80s.
Okay.
They were much more accessible. There was much more available inventory. And if you actually knew and you were smart, like that Hulk 181 was the first appearance of Wolverine, then you had a competitive edge where you would buy these, you'd buy from wholesale or you'd buy from other retailers, and then you would mark them up 20, 50x.
And for our listeners who are not here, Steve has a gigantic smile on his face right now talking about Hulk 181, the first appearance of Wolverine. This comic book business took off?
Yes. It
started making money as a teenager.
Yeah. No, it paid my tuition, had a job right out of college, built it up to a company that at its peak was $20 million in revenue.
What?
Yeah.
Wait. You're selling comic books out of your dorm room, and this is before the internet?
This was before the internet.
So you're selling them. How are people finding you to begin with?
Well, there were collectible magazines, right? So people there was a newsprint called the Comic Book Buyer's Guide, and it was literally like a newspaper that had about a circulation of 100,000, and the core collectors would buy it. And so I started advertising in that, and then subsequently would go to conventions.
So you're advertising in this newspaper. Is it like Steve's limited edition comic books that you're advertising?
No, I created a name. At that point, I called it American Comics, and we eventually changed it to Another Universe. So,
I like that. Another Universe.
Yeah, Another Universe.
And we is other people?
Oh, it was me. And then ultimately I started hiring people, right?
What age were you at that point?
20.
How many people became part of this business?
Well, eventually there was well over 100 because, the thing about building a collectible business of direct response is back then there was a lot of pick and pack. So it was a warehouse. We had a warehouse. We ended up, which wasn't the best idea, having retail stores. We built a great website, right? So what got me into e-commerce was in 94, we began to enter the internet, and we created back then a website based on fandom, right? So fandom would be articles on comic book. And at this point, we evolved into other niches, including science fiction. So we had Star Trek, Star Wars, fantasy, Tolkien, et cetera, et cetera. So we had another universe of collectibles that we were handling. And we created a website where people could go and find reviews of movies, find reviews of comic books, find reviews of toys. It was amazing. We had so many people, and we just created content. And then the idea was, well, we'll create this content, and then we'll get their contact information and we'll ship them a catalog. So this was really early when there wasn't e-commerce. You were just getting leads, and then you were taking those leads and you were shipping them out a catalog for them to buy from you. And then by 1996, what became ultimately the Yahoo store evolved, and we were able to create an e-commerce platform on Yahoo. And we started to sell on our collectible site. We started to sell product directly through the internet. So this was really, really, really early stages of internet.
So you're at 100 employees almost.
Yes.
And this was after starting something in your dorm room. So you basically like building a little empire here. And then what happens next?
Well, I made the decision to bring in some investors at a time to help open some retail stores, which the one aspect of this story I would tell you is retail stores are very, very tough. So we had a group of investors in, and we were approached by a Silicon Valley-based company to sell. And they were a group called Fandom, and they offered us a lot of money, mostly in stock.
And how old were you at this point?
I was about 30 at that point.
Wow. So that's in 10 years, you built something that was ready to sell to a company in Silicon Valley.
Yes. So we sold it, got a lot of what we considered to be pretty big value. This was at the time when, companies were being built like Amazon. This is back with AOL. I mean, there were hundreds and hundreds of companies getting funded back between 96 and 1998. And Fandom was a company that received on Series A close to $50 million. So they had so much money, and they were literally doing what we were doing, but they were trying to do it on an entertainment basis, and they wanted an e-commerce backbone, and so made a lot of synergistic sense. So we sold the company, and then the dot bomb or dot bubble burst, and they were not one of the survivors.
I don't know about a dot-com bubble bursting. What is that?
Oh, well, in 1999, there was a series of stock market price eclipses. So you had companies like eBay, Yahoo, Netscape. They were coming out one after another, and the prices just kept getting pushed up in the public market. And it was almost like a little mini gold rush. And so more and more companies were being pushed to go IPO. And at a certain point in 1999, the bubble burst, which meant that the window for those public companies closed. And it had to do with some financial unrest. But when that happened, a lot of these companies were based on models of just having massive cash burns and trying to drive revenue. But they didn't have the cash to sustain themselves. And most of those companies folded. They went out of business. I mean, literally 90% of those companies that were funded between 96 and 99 went out of business during the dot-com bubble burst. And Fandom was one of them. And Fandom really had great concept, but then they were being driven by the venture capitalists to become a network. And this was way, way before the backbone of internet capacity would allow distribution. I mean, this was 10 years before Netflix. So great idea, not a great idea in 1999 to become a network. There just wasn't the infrastructure to do it. And they were burning $3 to $4 million a month in cash flow.
Wow. Number one, wow. Number two, how did that feel to build something that I'm guessing you were incredibly proud of course, get compensated for it very fairly, but then to see it die?
It was hard. I mean, it was tough. So I still have a lot of second thoughts and regrets about what we could have done had I built it differently, had I brought in different investors.
What's the biggest thing?
Well, I would say, which is the lesson I certainly learned with VTrips, you'll never get into trouble if you run a profitable business. And you'll never get into trouble if your business model is purely based on growing in a profitable manner. And in another universe, we got caught up in some of this by trying to expand, by using investment capital to expand, when it would have been much smarter just to use our own internal profit to expand. So, that's one of the reasons why at VTrips we've not taken private equity. That lesson is one where I think growing profit, being profitable, and building a good business is really the biggest lesson I learned. And certainly looking at Fandom and some of these other companies that collapsed, they collapsed because they had massive burn rates. They could not control their costs. And I think there's companies in this industry that have gotten funded by VCs that are running on that same path, where they're burning through huge amounts of capital because they're not running fundamentally sound businesses.
And where does passion fit in this picture?
For vacation rentals?
No, in general. I mean, you're identifying what sounds like a primordial aspect of a business, and that is there must be profits in order to survive. Is passion part of the equation? Must you be passionate?
Well, I think you have to have an industry that you enjoy, right? And I meet so many people in this industry who I think are in it for passion, but they just make ends meet. And that's not building a business, that's creating a job. And there's a big difference. And, we've gotten to a point with VTrips where we've bought 18 different companies. So I've had a chance to encounter a lot of people who have these small business, and they just never had a passion for anything more than just creating something that they enjoyed and helping some of their friends. And then eventually they needed a way out to exit because they were at a point where they wanted to retire. And that's okay for people, but I think there's a better way of doing things. And the better way of doing things is to run a business where you actually have a goal, where you have a strategy. It's not just about having a job, but it's about building a business. And I think that's the evolution of where this industry is. Because look, building a business is important, particularly in an industry where technology is transforming it, because you need resources, you need capital to make the investment into the areas to keep you competitive. And right now we have a lot of disruption in the vacation rental industry. And a lot of that disruption is coming from companies who have gotten funded by venture capitalists or who have a technology advantage. And some of these companies who are more driven by essentially having a job, having a hobby, doing something they love, are unprepared for the competitive aspect that this industry is heading into.
And I think something I learned, I would say, just over the last few years, I've always been much more on the passion side of the business spectrum and not being terribly concerned about profit. But I also have started to see how if profit is not a priority, your passion becomes irrelevant because you cease to exist. And that's a harsh thing for a passionate person to accept, but it's the truth, because there's a world out there that works in a certain way. And unless you've figured out something that no one else has, you must figure that out first in order to continue doing what you love, right?
Well, I think the lesson of the last recession is it's more than just passion that allows you to survive. You have to run a business. And we've now been a good 6-7 years from the last major recession, but there's going to be another economic slowdown and there's going to be another correction. So it's great to do something you love, and you should do something you love. But at the same time, you also must be a business person. You must do the things that are hard for you to do that ultimately make you successful. So case in point, when I did Another Universe I was in my 20s, I didn't pay any attention to the financials. I mean, it's not to say I didn't have an accounting department, but it wasn't a passion of mine. What was my passion was marketing, the internet, technology, product, right?
Hulk,
reading,
181.
reading, figuring out ways to find the new hottest collectible, right? Whether it's Magic the Gathering, Pokemon, whatever. I mean, that was what was great. But what I learned, and it took me actually not having my own business, but for 7 years I worked for other people, was I learned that the discipline of budgets, variance reporting, managing a business through financial reporting. And it's odd that it would take working for someone else as opposed to yourself to really install that discipline, because you would think, the saying is
aspect,
right? You treat someone else's money like it's your own, but in this case, I was treating someone else's money better than my own, right? I was more disciplined with taking a look at financial reporting, and I really spent a lot of time with accounting groups and accounting divisions, learning how to really review the P&L and the balance sheet, which really has helped me drive VTrips, because to me, what a business is about is certainly doing things you love, but it's also about making smart decisions, calculated decisions, and then running your decisions against variance reports and ultimately making decisions on the future as to what needs to happen. And sometimes those are decisions about cutting back marketing expenses, sometimes cutting back staff expenses, sometimes, you may make an acquisition, which we've done, where we've ended up closing offices because the acquisition just didn't work. So case in point, when we bought a business in New Mexico, it was an office in Santa Fe and Taos and Angel Fire. We could not make the offices in Angel Fire and Taos work. And rather than keep them open, we made that decision in 9 months and we closed those offices down. And that's, if you love it, it kind of hurts because you're saying, well, we should be able to make Taos and Angel Fire work. You know, they're ski destinations. But the numbers just said these are very difficult markets, hard to find people, and they're really not strong for spring or summer. So when there's droughts or not good snow, they don't work. So applying financial discipline makes sense. And applying financial discipline makes the most sense for people who don't read financial information because they're the ones that are most likely to get into financial trouble.
You ended up selling the business, the comic book business, and then starting a vacation rental business immediately?
No, I took about 7 years off.
What did you do in 7 years off?
Well, I worked for Marvel Comics for about a year.
Oh, and brought with you everything that you had. Why are you laughing?
Well, it was about a year at Marvel Comics. I worked for a gentleman named Ike Perlmutter, who bought the company out of bankruptcy through his company called Toy Biz. And he brought me in to essentially clean up. This was during the dot-bomb situation. They were going to create a spinoff called Marvel.com, and they were going to spin it off and trade it public. And they got caught in that window, right? That window where the IPO market froze. So they had almost 60 or 70 employees, and they had a .com division where they didn't really even know what people were doing. It was hatched up by a bunch of people in McKinsey. So I came in, and Ike, originally from Israel, and he was the guy who literally bought Marvel out of bankruptcy. And I just remember spending so much time with him because he was always in my office at 7 a.m. when I would arrive, and he would be asking me, who am I going to cut today?
Ouch, that does not sound like a fun job.
Well, Ike did pretty well. He ended up selling Marvel for a couple billion to Disney. So
Billion?
Couple billion, yeah.
Wow. And you were with him for 1 year?
Yeah.
And what about the other 6 years? You said take off. That to me is not off.
No, well, I mean, I ended up taking a little time off and backpacked through Southeast Asia in between. I ended up at a company called iMatic, which was a technology company based on facial recognition and biometrics. That was a very interesting time. And
that was a shift.
Well, it was technology, right? So if you're good at technology, which I evolved into, you're able to kind of leverage that. So, I had definitely built a skill of e-commerce and understanding technology. And I definitely I never applied for a job. Jobs were offered to me. And, these were high profile jobs. And I ultimately, after that, I ended up at the Bradford Exchange, which was a collectible company, privately held collectible company selling primarily. They were known for selling plates, right? Collectible plates in the 70s. They created an exchange for selling plates. Think about this. Now, plates are popular in Germany and certain parts of Europe.
Like eating plates.
Well, they were Elvis plates or scenery plates.
A plate that you eat off of.
Yeah.
Or are you talking about the same word here?
Right.
Okay.
So they sold collectible plates, and they sold series of plates, and they had an exchange.
This is like the ultimate limited edition business.
It was fantastic until the SEC got involved. And
what happened?
Well, when you have collectibles and then you have your own exchange and you're creating the buy-sell market.
Yeah, they were manipulating the limited editions.
They were manipulating the limited editions.
Folks, quick interruption. You may have noticed me throw out the phrase limited edition a few times. It's a theory for vacation rentals that argues that staying unique is not only the best, but the only way to carve out a place in our industry's future. Quick shout out to Sean and the team from Point Central for sponsoring this podcast and allowing me to share personal stories like this one. This kind of personality and background of the story you're hearing, we all have that to a degree. We are all limited edition nerds. And the home automation folks at Point Central, they're the proud supporters of all that. They give new meaning to the phrase unlocked.
So they ended up kind of diversifying out of plates. They got into things like villages and dolls.
What does that even mean?
Have you never seen this?
Villages?
Your mom didn't have a Thomas Kincaid Village in her basement. So villages are these like little towns that people would start to build. And
like
they
almost, I'm envisioning like a nativity
Yes.
scene, almost like you'd find in a church around Christmas time.
Yes.
That?
Yeah.
No, my mother did not have that in our basement.
So normally they take a ping pong table, put a little cloth over it, and then they'd start to build these little villages. And every month you'd ship them another part. And then there'd be little figurines and little gas lamps. So you would create the Thomas Kincaid Gas Lamp Village.
And this was part of their diversification out of plates into villages. And what was the other thing?
Well, they had dolls. They had music boxes. I mean, it was a $500 million company.
And there are people
revenue.
that obsess over these things and are willing to pay really good money for the newest gas lamp for their village.
Right. So it was called continuity programs. And continuity programs are based on the fact that you acquire a customer and then you just keep shipping them over and over and over until they say no. So you would just keep shipping them another piece.
Oh, they're paying monthly or something?
Yeah, they're on a monthly install. So every single month they get another village.
Continuity.
They had trains. They had a Simpson train, and you would start off with the engine and a couple cars, and then you would just keep getting cars. And it was incredible.
And you were with them for some time?
For 3 years,
And
they
then?
transferred me down to Florida, and simultaneously I started getting involved in real estate. Bradford Exchange was up in Chicago, right? So it was very cold in Chicago, and I wanted a winter place in Florida. So I bought my first vacation home in Florida.
And what year was that?
2003.
Okay. And did you start renting it out to visitors?
Yes. So this was right after 2001. So 9/11 happened, and the economy was pretty recessed at that point. So little did I know that property managers in the area were not taking new inventory.
But was that part of the plan when you bought the home?
Yeah,
Okay.
my plan was to rent it, and my plan was to use a property manager. And I couldn't find a property manager. And so I said, well, my background is e-commerce. I'll just create my own website. And
For one property?
yeah,
What was the website?
It's called vacationrentalpros.com.
.com. Okay. And did it work?
Yeah. So I went to a site called Rent-A-Coder, and for $500, I built a website with a coder out of Pakistan. And almost immediately, I started to get bookings.
And it had like how many pages on the site?
I don't know, probably 10 or 11.
One about the property.
One about the property, and then I had things about events and activities. So I was pretty good at kind of getting organic search. So over, in a very short period of time, I started to have a lot of traffic. I also did some listings on sites like, at that point, VRBO and other sites like vacationrentals.com. And I soon had so many inquiries that I didn't have enough places for them to go. So, I was filling my property up.
What was the name of that property?
It was called, I called it by the road. It was called Albee, the Albee Cottage.
Okay, very good.
And it was blocked from the Gulf, and, cute little cottage. And
you got all these inquiries that you can't accommodate. And what'd you do?
bought another home.
Naturally.
So I bought another home, and I learned from my guests that the thing that they wanted was a pool.
And you were managing this yourself, or
Yeah.
you hired someone to do
No,
it?
I was handling
You were the point
myself.
person.
I had a couple people in the area that were doing the cleaning.
Okay.
And then just like, many of the people that you interview, I bought another home, and then I bought another, and then that was it. I didn't need to own multiple homes in one place. And then I had people I knew that said, could I start renting their home?
Because they saw you were doing a good job.
Right. I was filling it up. I was getting great income, good guest reviews, the whole bit. So then all of a sudden, I became a property manager as I started to manage other people's property. And I had 20 properties that I was managing, moonlighting. And at that point, I said, okay, I have got to do this full-time.
Moonlighting, what were you doing full time at that point?
E-commerce.
Wait, with what company?
Bradford Exchange.
Oh, you were still with Bradford at that time.
I was still at Bradford Exchange.
So you decided to pull the plug on Bradford. That was your full-time job and focus full-time on property management.
That's right.
That was a big decision or easy one?
That was easy. There was clear I had a business that was going to take off.
Okay. And did it?
Yes.
What does it look like today?
So we have 1,800 properties. We have 150 employees. We're in 5 states in North America. We'll do over $40 million of revenue this year. And we're considered to be one of the top property management companies in North America.
Does everyone in the industry like you?
Well, I guess it would depend on who you ask.
Does anyone dislike you that you are aware of?
Well, it's funny enough. I think there's some people that work at some of the OTAs who are not fans of some of my comments that I make.
Why? What kind of comments are you making?
Well, I'm a little critical of the OTAs. And the criticism of the OTAs has to do with my experience with them. And, I've started to speak at these seminars, and I'm doing these speeches called unfiltered. So typically unfiltered would be what you and I might talk at a bar, where we would have
no
our
holds
drinks.
Barred.
Right. No
Telling
holds
it like
barred.
it is.
But most people will not publicly say the things they say privately because they're concerned about retaliation. And I'm big enough where I said, okay, look, I'm going to just tell it like it is. And hopefully what the OTAs get out of this is constructive criticism. And so I started to do these sessions called the pros and cons of OTAs, which a lot of property managers really enjoyed.
And I attended one in Semiahmoo. And that was the first time that I met you. And that's exactly what I said to you. The first thing was you just shoot straight. And people tend to appreciate that without any kind of real bias or intention other than telling it like it is with the hope that people can use that information to improve themselves. And that brings you to what point now? Where are we going next?
Well, I think, my passion right now is developing new inventory. So that's my passion.
And what does that mean?
Well, new inventory would be vacation rentals, right?
Developing means
from the ground up.
From the ground up.
Purpose built for the guest from the beginning of the life cycle. So we're not talking about retrofitted where we go in and we renovate a property. We're talking about from the blueprint up, we build a purpose-built property designed for vacation rentals and designed to maximize it. And it's more than that. It's on a scale that I'm now a developer where I actually own developments. So we're not talking about building one, we're talking about building hundreds of new inventory. And now I'm working with developers and we're going to be doing modular. So we're literally, in order to move this stuff as fast as possible and to kind of avoid some of the labor situations in resort areas, we're going with modular, high-end modular.
I don't know what that means, modular.
Houses that are built in factories as opposed to outside.
So you can build more, faster, cheaper.
And better, actually. So you have to keep within, the configurations of how modular plants are built, but it's amazing. And you can build a house in 60 days as opposed to a year or 18 months. So we've got a factory set up in Greenville, South Carolina. I own developments in Pigeon Forge, Gatlinburg, Tennessee. And we're moving forward with a development first called Smoky Cove. And probably the average size cabin we're going to build is 6 bedrooms, and most of them will have a private pool that's heated.
When you take everything that you've learned from this previous life, pre-vacation rentals, especially the comic book thing, which I think taught you, and it sounds like an interesting lesson about the growth of both your business and an industry, and in some cases, the death of a business or an industry. How do we apply that to vacation rentals? And I'm now speaking on behalf of the industry. What is the best and most sustainable thing that we can be doing to make sure that this niche, our passion, is around for a long time?
Well, the passion, the niche is, and the people involved, to be around, you're going to have to run profitable business. And I know that, I'm repeating myself, but that's really the lesson. And if you truly are passionate about the product, the next step is, if you're profitable, that means you can pick and choose the inventory that you think makes sense for you to represent. If you're not in a profitable position, that it's hard to do that. Beyond that, from a niche standpoint, we're going to have a lot of different opportunities for people to basically take a look at what they actually like. What part of the aspect of guest hospitality do they like? Do they like being small? Do they like being big? Do they like certain components of it, like concierge services? So there's a wide spectrum of opportunities, but I think everything is going to start with running a profitable business if you want to be in this industry for the long term.
That's a really good lesson. It is maybe a little bit hard for some people to hear, but true. in your nature, telling it like it is. I like that. That was the interview.
All right.
You did great.
Well, I told you there was no boundaries. So I know feel free to edit because there was a lot of content here.
Thank you.
And to close, just a quick reminder of who made this episode possible. It's Point Central, the property automation experts of our industry. Head over to pointcentral.com/VRMB to learn more. And when you use that page, you'll become eligible for free HVAC analytics, which tells managers when the HVAC starts to misbehave before our guests get upset. This also makes property owners happy by taking care of the problem before it becomes too expensive. And if you're feeling cheerful, please also consider writing us a quick review in your podcast app. We read every single one of them, and we pass them along to our esteemed guests. This industry is growing up quickly, my friends. This industry is unlocked.